why are there so many different denominations? Like, if we all believe in this one book, this Bible,
That's right.
this one true God,
Yeah.
why are there so many different denominations that have all these little nuances? And I struggle to answer that question every single time.
Yeah.
So I think, again, we should definitely address this and talk about maybe just even the history of where denomination even came from, and why the denomination of non-denomination is in fact a denomination in itself. So it gets complicated.
Yeah. And if memory serves correctly, you and I, so we both belong to Woodside, a non-denominational church, though it has some sort of kind of Baptist leanings for some things, but it's not denominational. But I think we both were brought up in Baptist church, right?
Yeah.
Growing up here in Michigan. So yeah. So we've sort of crossed some denominational lines a bit there. Yeah, I think this is a great subject. This was one that was pretty confusing to me growing up too, and learning more about the faith and whatnot, and even, like you said, some of the differences in the denominations and intricacies and whatnot. So I think maybe it's good to start off with just defining what is a church denomination. So let me give a very simple definition there. Church denominations are branches of the Christian faith that share the same theological perspectives, leadership structures, and traditions. So that's church denominations sort of in a nutshell. Now, church denominations have unity in the essentials, but not uniformity in everything. So unity in the essentials would be, of course, things like the authority of Scripture, the death and resurrection of Jesus, the triune nature of God, the essentials of the faith. Not having uniformity in everything would be entailing something like differences in modes of baptism. So some traditions believe in full body immersion, others don't. Some traditions would baptize an infant, others don't. So we would call these like secondary, or other issues would be like tertiary issues.
Which we did a whole talk about that in our theological formation series.
Yeah, we sure did. So that would be very important. And it's also important, some of this stuff is important not only for us understanding our faith, but also to inoculate us against other faith traditions, some of whom, want to persuade us to their faith traditions. So, for example, in discussing the differences between like the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, I've come across loads of people who say, well, aren't they just other denominations, other types of Christianity? And I'll say, no, it's a very different faith tradition. And I think it's respectful to them to say that, because we do have some differences in the very essentials of the faith, itself. But all that being said, back to the question of why there are so many church denominations. So I think the first and easiest answer to this is just the differences in interpretation. When we're reading the Bible, we're trying to understand what it meant to the original audience, and also the timeless and transcendent message to us today. As we're doing that, there's experts who have studied some of the languages of the Bible, Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, and translate copies and whatnot. And in doing so, even some of the translations are a bit different at different points. And that happens with translating from any language to another. And then on top of that, we all bring our cultural baggage and perspectives to our readings. I know sometimes we like to think that we all approach our Bible readings very objectively. And while we may try and do that to the best of our abilities, we always have a bit of subjectivity as part of our cultural background and whatnot. So all of these things often lead us to interpret verses in some slightly different ways. But another important thing to consider is that there's been some significant splits of churches throughout church history. And two in particular are pretty significant. The first is the Great Schism in the year 1054, and also the Protestant Reformation. Now, the Great Schism ultimately resulted in a split between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. And this split, there were tensions that led up to it for a while. There were tensions in theological perspectives, tensions in the political structure of the Roman Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodoxy, and also some cultural differences. So those were some of the things, along with like differences in interpretation, that sort of contributed to differences in denominations and whatnot. But then we have, of course, probably the most well-known is the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century, where you had leaders like Martin Luther, for example, who challenged or protested certain aspects and teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. You've probably heard, for example, his 95 Theses, this list of these 95 criticisms that he had against the church. Now, what's important to note is that Martin Luther never sought out, and I think Jacob might have talked about this. He might have gone into some more detail in another video. But Martin Luther never sought out to create a bunch of different denominations. His goal was actually to bring the Roman Catholic Church back to faithfulness of Scripture and to early church history. But inevitably, some denominations came about from it. And some of those new Protestant denominations were Anglicanism, Calvinism, and Lutheranism.
Okay.
And so in current day, we have these now 4 major streams of Christianity throughout the world. And there are denominations that flow from each of these.
Right.
So these 4 is the Catholic stream, Protestantism, Orthodoxy, and Pentecostalism. So again, there's denominations that flow then from all 4 of those major streams. But then there's also, frankly, the global nature of the gospel itself. While God originally chose the Israelite people to be his people and to ultimately be a light to another nations, the gospel is just that. It's for all people, for all time, for all nations. So you can imagine the different cultural ideas and perspectives and nuances that we all bring to our scripture reading. Someone reading scripture in Malaysia is going to read it or have different perspectives than someone reading it in South Korea. Us reading it here in America may have different perspectives than someone reading it, in a European country. So we all bring our cultural nuances to our reading of Scripture. And there's a beauty in that diversity. But there's also a challenge. The challenge is that we shouldn't allow those differences, as long as they're not differences in the essentials of the faith, to ultimately result in disunity. I know on my bookshelf, I have this one shelf that's dedicated to nothing but different interpretations of scriptures from the global Christian world. And I know for me, it's been particularly helpful and insightful to see certain stories of the Bible, certain parables and whatnot afresh. Now, that doesn't mean that we ultimately have to agree with every perspective that someone has. We don't agree with that even in our own context, but it does help us to grow, to understand our brothers and sisters across the world better, and really just opens up Scripture even more widely for us. So again, why are there so many churches and denominations? Well, there's differences in biblical interpretations. There's theological, cultural, and political differences that have resulted in some major historical shifts in church history. And there's, frankly, the global, diverse nature of the church itself. But I think it's important to remember, as we discuss all these differences, in 1 Corinthians, Paul says this to the church of Corinth. And it's particularly important because the church of Corinth was going through a lot of disagreement at the time. So what he says in that book is particularly relevant for this discussion. He says, "What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God gives the growth." The point is that though we may have learned from different people, we may have different leaders, different teachers who have been particularly influential to us, we may even have some differences in the way we interpret Scripture. It is God ultimately who gives the growth, meaning that we both, no matter what our differences are, ultimately belong to the same God, and that's King Jesus.
Hey everyone, I'm Jacob from Everyday Theology, and Everyday Theology is a product of Woodside Bible Church. And if you didn't know, Woodside Bible Church is located in Southeast Michigan. We actually have 14 campuses in the Metro Detroit area. And so if you are in Southeast Michigan, we would love to have you join us on a Sunday morning. You can find out more information on our website about where our locations are and how to get involved here at woodsidebible.org.